All right, welcome everyone. It's very exciting to be there. And I think it's always the best events during the conference is always the more niche one. So I've realized specifically in the realigned, we don't have to talk about viewpoints. We don't have to talk about real gaming stuff and hunting dynamics. So we can talk about more real on stream. And I think that's super exciting to discuss with you guys. And with IOTA, we've been in the market for the last 10 years, right? And so this year will be our 10-year anniversary. Conversely, we have a very good event action to celebrate that. And I think what I want to talk about today is actually the different approach that I always take everybody else in the market and how we are a very unique in position to really capture this view that option is going to come on chain. I think the first question, and probably the most fundamental question that we should ask ourselves is why are we doing all of these? Why was blockchain invented? Why did Bitcoin start all this? And I think the main summary is it was not to make money quickly, right? Even though the entire market digressed a little bit over the last few years, I think what is very obvious is that blockchain was invented as a solution which was offered, right? And the problem that we have is it's very difficult to agree on the truth. Especially in the digital world, it is really hard to know that if you can trust the data, if you can really share data with third parties, and especially if you're in like this multilateral world where you have different parties, different countries trying to coordinate with each other, it's incredibly difficult to agree on the truth, right? This is why there's 13 different standards for the same thing, because each company is like, hey, I'm going to make my own standard, which is better than the other company, or I'm going to make my own standard because I don't want the other company to control this ecosystem, right? And so I think today what is very obvious is that we need to have a decentralized network, so like it was a backbone infrastructure on which we can build our digital world, because the digital world cannot be built on centralized systems, and we can have really this unstoppable digital truth, right? And there's only one solution in which we can make it easy and seamless to share data at internet scale, and that is blockchain, right? Blockchains really give us this globally accepted source of truth. So you know that all the data that is stored there can be verified, can be trusted, can be authenticated. And I think this is really the main reason why blockchains make sense and why they're so important for the real world, because now we can really use it as this general infrastructure on which to build this digital world on, and in which to really build new ecosystems in this case. And so this is mind being pretty blockchain, and this is why we're hard at bringing the real world on chain. I think another important lesson learned over the last few years is that we cannot build this in isolation, right? This is not like this Silicon Valley where you're going to have one company that is going to dominate the entire ecosystem, but this is really about co-creating, right? Building together with others. The main difference between, or one of the main option, if this is the option in AI, is like in AI, you can use ChatGPT today and you will be, I don't know, 10, 20, 30% better at your tasks and your job, right? You can really more easily write, you can analyze things more quickly, can do research better, right? So the productivity things are really instant because you can really benefit from it, like just as an individual or just as a company. Now with blockchain is different, right? Blockchain are ecosystem technologies, right? So you can only actually benefit from blockchain if you establish an entire ecosystem. And this is really where the adoption challenge has come about over the last 10 years, because you don't go to a single company and tell them, hey, you're going to use blockchain, you're so much more productive, right? You go to a single company and tell them like, hey, if entire world or if your entire industry uses blockchain, you will be so much more productive. And this is the problem, right? Because in order to establish an ecosystem or convince an ecosystem that an industry, manufacturing, finance to use a blockchain, it really to do all that convincing work to get them to adopt the same technology and to get them to build a whole of that same technology, right? For example, stablecoins. Think about how long it took for stablecoins to actually be adopted and reach these network events where the counterparty is willing to accept stablecoins, right? Thanks to the law, although thanks to the adoption of the last decade, we're actually now in a position where like traders in Rwanda or Kenya are accepting stablecoins, right? So this is really where these ecosystems are open and where we have these network effects. And this is really why blockchain took a lot of time to actually get up on the real world. And I think this is also why we had all of these other use cases being built in the meantime, and the fees like getting and so forth, because there's just so much raw material output with people. And I think the other point is important is in order for blockchain to be adopted in the real world, we have regulation, right? We cannot just build the system without being regulated or without being abiding by laws, right? Because that's what we need in order to bring a real world on chain. Just a very simple example is like, how do you tokenize a physical asset, right? What you need to do is you need to have a tie-in between a digital NFT token and that represents the legal ownership to the physical asset, right? Now there was two very different systems. One is the real world, one is the digital. And so you need to have laws, right? You need to abide by laws and actually regulate that a digital token can represent legal eligible or physical asset, right? And so this is why I think it's always important to think about how we don't replace the current system, but how we actually build a connection to the current system. And this is exactly what Pierre IOTA and are focused on. There's three different asset on-ramps or three different on-ramps, real-world on-ramps that we need. We can bring data on-chain by with things like weather data, with things like location data, or it can be more important information so you can prove the chain of custody over the grandmaster good being the supply chain. Who verified the data can be about people and so on and so forth, right? The second thing that we need to bring on chain is identities, right? Because are cryptographically secure and verifiable entities, individuals, companies, or machines, so you can really verify who are you dealing with, right? And this again is where we need to tie into the real world because we need to make sure that these identities are unique, right? They are verifiably vulnerable by people or these organizations. And the third thing that we need to do is we need to bring assets on chain, physical commodities, but also financial assets like funds, like money market funds, like stable coins, right? Where we're digitizing fiat money. Because again, this is like, we always used to joke at IOTA, like the world would be so much better if everything ran on blockchain, right? That's a simple truth, right? Because it runs so much more seamless and so much more efficiently. But why we are all here is like we actually need to build the solutions to get to that system where we are running fully on-chain, right? So this is where we need to have these three different on-ramps for data, for identities, and for assets, because this is really how we can build this digital ecosystem then. Now, this is really why we at IOTA are focused on this, right? So we had a major upgrade earlier this year where we switched to a new, completely revamped layer 1 architecture, switching to Move, which is a more secure and also more scalable smart contract platform, right? And making it sure that all of these use cases that we're envisioning can be built on top of IOTA, and that IOTA is sort of enterprise ready, right? For governments, for enterprise, and also for startups to use our technology. And I think this is really where we really diverge from everybody else in the market, because what we have been focused on, especially over the last 5 years, is on this vertical of international trade, right? Trade is really the backbone of our economy, right? Like $30 trillion worth of goods are being imported and exported every year. But the system in which our modern economy is built is still archaic, right? Like it still runs on paper documents because, funnily enough, people don't really trust the data that they get online, right? And so even though there's like standards or there's been laws to accept digital data, everybody's still using paper documents because they trust a piece of paper more than digital data, right? So this is exactly where we saw an opportunity to actually do exactly what I mentioned before. Digitize the data first, put it on chain, issue digital identities for the traders, and then thirdly, tokenize the physical assets. So what we did is we partnered together with some amazing organizations like the World Economic Forum, the Tony Blair Institute, Trademark Africa, on actually building this solution to first digitize the data, right, replacing paper documents. So this solution already runs in production in Kenya today. So it's actually being used by traders there to replace the paper documents and to actually have the proof that when they're exporting goods, that the data is on-chain and they can share this data with third parties like the port authorities, or banks, or also with, which is what we work on right now, with other countries, right? So it runs in Kenya. We've been doing pilots over the last 2 years in the UK, in Europe. And now we're really getting to a stage where this is starting to really get adopted
because countries understand we want to export more, we want to decrease costs, and we want to improve efficiency, right? So this is exactly where IOTA, with our digitization solution, comes into play. And it's also where we're now issuing digital entities for those traders. And afterwards, Salas, who is also a startup in our ecosystem, is going to talk about tokenizing physical commodities, actually rare earth minerals in Rwanda, and how we're doing that on top of IOTA. So here's a short video about this. I think what is very unique about our approach with this is that we're targeting governments, right? So we didn't approach Maersk, we didn't approach the big companies, but we really approached the governments first, which is the most difficult customer to have, right? Because it takes so long for things to take fruition and for things to actually be adopted. But once you're in there, you're really in there, right? And they really understand that IOTA today is in a very unique position to actually help them solve their problems in digitizing their supply chains. So these are actually some of the farmers in Kenya that are using our solution to digitize their flour supply chains. But we do the same for coffee as well, and now also with rare earth minerals. And so we built this as an open source non-profit foundation in Switzerland. It doesn't have a token, right? It runs on IOTA, and it solves real world problems. And I think that's what's super exciting. And so I think now we're really focused on this vertical integration, bringing the data on chain, bringing the identities on chain, and then in the next phase, we're going to bring the assets on chain, so that we really can then actually fuel these assets, which are yield bearing, right? Real yield from the real economy, who are really valuable, right? We're bringing them into our DeFi ecosystem so that we can then build decentralized trade finance marketplaces. So anybody can actually start financing these deals because there's a huge funding gap in trade finance, right? And so this is really where we at IOTA are combining the real world, bringing the real world assets on chain with DeFi primitives, right? Using yield-bearing stablecoins, using lending marketplaces to actually use the collateral once it's tokenized to get financing, cheaper financing for these traders. And so this is really the next phase that we're taking with IOTA. And so if you're interested in learning more about this, or if you want to participate in building out this ecosystem, feel free to reach out to me afterwards. Thank you.